For years now, Fellow has designed the absolute best electronic variable temperature controlled gooseneck kettles on the market. And today, we're excited to announce the brand new Fellow Stagg EKG Pro and Stagg EKG Studio Pro, featuring the brand new ultra-fast M1 Max chipset. Oh, sorry, wrong product. The Stagg EKG Studio Pro features a brand new, groundbreaking design. The kettle now comes in an all new— oh, wait, it's the same kettle. Why didn't we just sell the base separately then? Well, the new Stagg EKG Studio Pro Max Stagg EKG Studio Pro features a brand new base with new features like color. So again, the new Stagg EKG Studio Pro delivers a brand new industry disruptive product. And don't worry, for those of you at home that already own the Stagg EKG kettle, you can simply throw it away and purchase a new one at just $260. Only a 40% markup from the previous iteration. Okay, bad British accent and Jony Ive impersonation joke aside, this is the new Fellow Stagg EKG Studio Pro, a kettle that has a mouthful of a name, obviously very reminiscent of Apple products. Now, first things first, for some disclaimers, I did purchase this kettle by myself for the full price of about $260. Secondly, this video does have a sponsor, and that is Cliff & Pebble, but more on them later. Okay, so let's dive right into the review, starting with the various models and the one I specifically have here. So the base Fellow Stagg EKG electric kettle goes for about $165, already fairly premiumly priced for an electric gooseneck kettle. The new Pro model goes for $195 and the Pro Studio Edition goes for $225. For each of those models, you can add about $30 for wooden accents. Now, the only difference listed on the Fellow website between the Pro and the Pro Studio Editions are the more premium build quality and materials on the base of the Pro Studio Edition that uses a combination of metal and glass versus a mostly plastic build. Now, speaking of which, let's talk about the build quality. Now, starting with the kettle itself, because there are very few changes here. The only change I've really been able to notice is this new lid, which now uses a rubber gasket seal so that it sits a little bit more flush and it's a little bit nicer to pull off and put back on. It also has a very slightly larger knob on top. The new kettle also now has a little slit at the top versus the 3-hole design on the old lid. The new lid does fit on the old kettle, but the old kettle lid does not fit on this new kettle. Another thing that is a little bit different is the metal portion connecting the wood handles, which is now black instead of silver. I like that. Now, besides those changes, I really couldn't find any other significant difference between the new and old kettles. The size, the shape, material, and spout are all seemingly identical. I also noticed that these are not interchangeable between the different bases, probably being the reason why you can't purchase just the base on its own. The new kettle only goes on the new base, and the old kettle stays on the old base, not being able to fit on the new one. Now let's talk a little bit about that base. Again, this being the Pro Studio Edition, it has a glass and metal build quality. Now first, let's take a look underneath the base. You can see that they look fairly identical at first glance. But closer inspection does show that the new kettle base has a little bit of a different texture, which I actually kind of like, but it does still feel like plastic. The metal portion of the build seems to be this new inner lining between that plastic base and the outer frame, which also happens to be metal. I would expect this to hold up better in a commercial environment, but honestly, for home use, I had no issues with the plastic base of the original. In fact, my original Stagg is nearly 3 years old and still works perfectly. The glass surface on top is quite nice. It has a nice smooth chamfer around the edges, and it sort of helps hide the now full color LCD screen, which I think is a nice little design element. The dial on the base also feels noticeably different from the old one. The knob spins much more quietly and feels a lot smoother, and the click is also just a little bit more satisfying. We do also have a secondary button, which is now used to switch between the brew modes or to go into the menu settings. On the rear of the kettles, we no longer have switches to switch between holding mode or temperatures, as it's all now done through the settings of the kettle. Okay, so now let's get into the biggest differences with the new Fellow Stagg EKG Pro and Pro Studio versus the original. There are a number of new digital features on this kettle, most of which are nice little quality of life upgrades. Now firstly, navigating into the settings menu is a single click of the smaller button. At the top, we do have the schedule feature, which lets you choose a desired temperature to bring the kettle to at a set time. This is similar to how I have a smart plug that lets me turn on my espresso machines in the morning before I'm out of bed to warm up. One thing to note is you can now also change temperatures to half a degree in terms of Celsius if you use Celsius over Fahrenheit. Next up, we have guide mode, which gives you a few pre-selected temperatures for your different brewing methods if you're not sure where to begin. These include green and white tea at 82 degrees Celsius, AeroPress at 90.5, French press at 93, pour over at 96, and herbal or black tea or just straight up boiling at 100 degrees Celsius. Next up, we have a chime, which lets you set an audible little chime sound when your desired temperature is reached, and this can also be adjusted anywhere from a level 1 to level 10 volume, but personally I found that even at 10, the chime is still quite soft. It mostly gets drowned out by the volume of the water boiling. Next is units, which is pretty self-explanatory, allowing you to swap between Fahrenheit and Celsius. Sadly, no Kelvin units here. I'm kidding. Totally not necessary. But interestingly enough, it is something that could be added, because this kettle also connects to Wi-Fi for future updates. Yep, we're at that point in life where we have Wi-Fi connected kettles. Why would it need to be updated? I don't know. I've had my original Stagg for 3 years now, not really thinking I'd ever need a Wi-Fi connected update for it. Under the General tab, you can set the language between English, French, or Spanish. You can also set a digital or analog clock to display while not in use. And of course, this is also where you would choose the Wi-Fi option, which is how you can get those over-the-air updates for your kettle. Certainly not something that I ever thought I would be saying out loud. It's also worth noting that only 2.4 GHz networks are supported to connect to this kettle. To connect it to Wi-Fi, you would need to download the Fellow app and not the Fellow Stagg EKG Plus app. The app itself is pretty basic. It shows you a list of your connected devices, in this case, just one, and if they need a firmware update and what those updates provide. However, I couldn't actually figure out what to click on to get the update going, as there was no update button. So maybe this is something that auto updates overnight, only time will tell. The next setting is altitude, which lets you set where you are above sea level to prevent overboiling. And this is done in increments of 30 meters from sea level all the way up to 3,000 meters or roughly 10,000 feet. For our last two settings, we have pre-boil, which will bring the kettle up to a full boil before bringing it down to your desired temperature, sort of as a way to purify your water. And finally, we do have hold mode, which can now be adjusted to hold your temperature between increments of 15 minutes up to an hour versus the old kettle where it would just hold your desired temp for about an hour. And finally, we of course have another little Easter egg. Similar to how we had Wormy on the original Stagg, this new one now has Bricky. To get to the game, you need to remove the kettle, click the smaller dial to get to the menu, spin the dial in either direction about 6 full rotations until you see Bricky pop up. It's definitely a fun little Easter egg, but obviously nothing that impacts your coffee brewing. Now before we get into if this kettle might be the right one for you, here's a quick message from today's sponsor, Cliff & Pebble. If you're in the market for your next espresso machine, grinder, or coffee accessory upgrade, be sure to check out Cliff & Pebble. The Chicago-based team has all your favorite brands including Rocket, Lilith, Baratza, and more. They provide excellent pre- and post-purchase customer service, and you can be rest assured knowing they'll help you out with all of your coffee brewing endeavors. To learn more about Cliff & Pebble, visit them using the link in the description down below. And once again, thanks to Cliff & Pebble for sponsoring today's video. So now, is it worth it? Okay, so real talk. This kettle, the EKG Pro Studio, has got a lot of little nice quality of life upgrades, but I'm really not sure if it's worth a 40% increase in price over the original Fellow Stagg, unless you really value those premium materials. But for just 30 bucks more, or roughly 18%, I think the new Pro is a solid choice over the original for those little quality of life features if you don't already have a very nice gooseneck kettle. Now, I certainly don't think that you'll need to upgrade if you do have an existing gooseneck kettle, regardless of if it is a Fellow one or not, but it is definitely got a nice little bit of features that other kettles don't. I do personally think the Apple-like naming structure is a little ridiculous and pretentious, but aside from that, this is a really well-built product with nice quality of life upgrades that I think most people can appreciate. In the past, I've had hit or miss experiences with some Fellow products, but the Stagg kettles have always been a hit. As always, you can find links to the kettle in the description down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.